But that's just scratching the surface of what a permaculture building could be. Inspired from permaculture, but applied for buildings.
Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast. I'm Cormac Harkin, and today I'm delighted to welcome Joe Petroni on the show. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Cormac. Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you. I'm looking forward to hearing about permaculture and architecture and how it comes together. Do you want to just give yourself a quick 30-second introduction there, please?
Of course. I am Joe. I'm an architect, and my focus is on the way permaculture blends with our built environment. I've been doing this for about 10, 15 years.
That's great. So we always start at the start with our guests. Just where did you hear about permaculture, and how did you start your journey in it?
I was an architect doing conventional architecture with my father, who was also an architect. And I was gradually growing disillusioned in all of that. And felt, there must be something more to the deep reason why I started doing this profession. And about, I want to say 12-ish years ago, I discovered Bill Mollison's book. And I took it with me to my father's newly bought small property in a rural area. And as I sat in the spring afternoons looking at the orchard in bloom, I was reading Bill Mollison's book, and David Holmgren's, of course. So I was reading Permaculture, and through those couple of nice breezy weeks in the countryside, my whole view of the way we build and the way we make places shifted, and clicked into something much more zoomed out. The orchard, in a way, was beginning to be a part of my work in a way it hadn't been before. And the spring flowing into a river started being a part of my work, which it hadn't done before. And the air and the orchard and everything was starting to be a part of my work. And that opened up the way for permaculture, which is exactly what it says on the blending permaculture principles to the architecture space. And so I've started applying the permaculture principles to the way I built and the way I worked, and developed a framework of sorts that I call Listen to Your Land, which is basically a land site analysis inspired from permaculture, but applied for buildings, for building on a site.
And is that you on the site physically, or can you do that remotely?
I can do that remotely, and I have been doing this for a while now. I started doing remote work with my dad, because I was traveling and he was slowly retiring, but we still had ongoing on and off projects. And we started doing Zoom and share screen sharing way before it was cool, way before COVID happened, way before the whole Zoom revolution. And I got a hang of it. I started doing it with clients and permaculture buffs, mainly off-grid enthusiasts. Permaculture for a lot of years was about coaching off-gridders and permaculture people into making their zone zero, making their house, the house part of their permaculture property and homes or homestead. And integrating all of the elements of the site in a way that makes sense for that house, for that built space.
Right. So now, so how did you go then? So it was just the book that you learned off, or how did you learn more about it then, about the permaculture side? How did you set about did you do a course, or are you self-taught?
I am a bookworm. Starting over. I'm a bookworm. I've studied everything. I took all that there was. At that time, there wasn't a whole lot to begin with, as content wise and permaculture courses wise. But I went through all of that. I went through everything, and I've been learning ever since. I mean, it's an ongoing thing. And lately permaculture has been evolving into what we today call regenerative. Permaculture is the forefather of regenerative design and regenerative agriculture, and then of course regenerative everything, including architecture. And so my focus now, even though it is it's an inherited thought from permaculture, but what I do today is called regenerative architecture.
Right. So if you take it back then from just before that 2 weeks in spring, where you discovered the book, up until now, what's been the biggest shift in the way you look at the architecture? Is there anything significant that would stand out?
The breaking of the silos of specialization. Permaculture has an instinctive systems thinking approach to things, an integrated approach to things, and it works with complexity because it started with nature. Whereas architecture started with, or lately, it starts from engineering. It starts from things that you know. And so it went into this hyper-mechanized way of seeing things that we see around us in general. And so what we're trying to do now is bring complexity back, and biomimicry is a lot of that. It brings the systems thinking and the complexity back into whatever your work is. And in my case, it's architecture. So I think understanding systems thinking has been the most important step here. Because before that, permarchitecture was a lot of bioclimatic design, passive, which is the European word for passive solar design, and of course, it's important to understand the land in a way that you can use to make your house more efficient. But it can be so much more than that. You can add so many layers of goodness, of good design. And once you open up that box, it's an incredibly fun playfield.
Right. So I get an imaginary 10 acres tomorrow, and I call you up and say, I need some help here. Like how do you sort of, what's that process like? Like, and then how do you take me then to look at the land and the property different, and what with different options?
It's an inner journey, finding a place and being in love with it and buying it and planning something for it, envisioning a brighter future for it. And so there's a lot of right brain, left brain thinking here. Of course, you have all of the straightforward left brainish measurements that you need to do with a place, but then you have all the poetry and spirit what we call genius loci, the spirit of the place, meditative sketching, listening. So the whole thing with listening to the land, with listen to your land, as a methodology is blending these two understandings, or these two categories of understanding a place. So we shift gear a lot, and we have a lot of Zooms, and every place is different. So it's a matter of not only understanding together what the inherent potential of the place is, but also to, if you want, commune with the place and understand what it wants to say, what its history is, all of the layers of understanding that you can have. The geological history of a place can be a fantastic way to understand what you can do with it. The watershed state. So the watershed is the whole water system that your land is a part of. And water is such an important part of a place and of placemaking in general. That for me, that's sort of, and in permaculture as well, is the first place that you start with, right? So understanding how you can, with your land project, regenerate the watershed, and how the building can help with that, is also a very, very important step. It's I want to say complex. It's a spiral. Sometimes I call it a messy spiral. It's a messy spiral towards growing potential.
Right. So it's like the permaculture principle: observe, interact, then you get the practical side, you take your measurements, you look where the water's going, you look where your restrictions are, and then you get a feel of the place, and then sort of let would that be a fair summary? And then design around them.
Oh, that's just the beginning. You look at the way, of course, the way the sun is on your the sun's path on your land is the main technical, so right left brain information that you need to gather, and that's for your building. In most temperate locations, getting a south-facing general layout of your house is the most simple and straightforward and cost-effective ways of getting a house more efficient, getting to warm up easily and cool down just as fast. But then you can have so many other elements. It's like those Japanese games, like they Go. You have just a couple of elements, but then you can make so many things out of them. It goes into infinity, because the elements of a house are relatively simple as well. You have bedrooms or places to sleep, you have places to eat, you have places to cook, you have places to spend time together. There's not a lot to a house. And yet you have millions and millions and millions of ways to build a house. There's no house that's the same as its neighbor. I mean, today there are. But in traditional cultures, from one place to the other, you have a different way of layouting a house and of making it interact with its environment. And it's because every environment and every place is different.
Yeah, I think I know the answer to this next question, but so do you focus on a particular style of house, or again,
Ah,
are you open to listening to the land and all?
style is a very interesting and tricky topic, because style usually arises from context. It's always a response to a cultural context. Just as fashion is. Fashion always starts as a counter to an existing fashion. As an active response to a context. And so when you take a style or a fashion and you put it in another context, so another context altogether, like you would take elephant pants now and bring them to, say, the Senegal, doesn't make sense, because they're not a response to that particular culture at that particular time. They're just something that you wanted to wear that day. And it's the same with house styles. Every single house style is a natural response to a particular environment. And of course, there's also the history of materials that goes into play, and the history of how we see ourselves as a culture towards nature and towards ourselves as a community. Architecture is very complex, and that's what a lot of us architects like about it. You can talk about stuff like this for ages. It goes, as I call it, turtles all the way down.
Yeah. So now, so we've had it now from the perspective of a buyer coming to you. What would that look like as a permaculture designer? If I come to you and I say I have a client here, how would I work with you as a designer and you as an architect to get the best? How would that, what would that look like? Do you have a process for that? Is that the way you work?
And most of the permaculture projects that I have been working with for individuals require very little local architect input. So there's that's one part of it. But then as I gradually started working with ecovillage design, regenerative neighborhood designs, and other bigger scale projects, then it's always an integrated process with the local architect that does the trick, because you can't do otherwise. But having a good architect on the spot in the region is a godsend always with a project.
Right. So I would have to have an architect and come to you.
It depends on the country where you are.
Yeah.
And the legislation for building in your particular region. Some countries don't need an architect for most housing. A lot of countries don't need an architect for housing.
I'm not really sure they need them here. I'm not entirely sure. So you mentioned eco villages there. Can you tell us more about that and your role in that?
Of course, when you start to work in the permaculture space, and specifically in the housing and construction space, there, bigger projects start to arrive that are basically all of them in the eco-village space. And I feel like the eco-village wave is sort of waning. And the regenerative community age is starting. And the difference between those, even though they sort of sound the same, but with a different hat, the difference for me between them is that eco-villages the eco-villages that we've built through the last 20, 30, even 40 years have been losing sight of the context where they are building, where they are doing them, making them. There are a lot of very nice developments otherwise in places like, say, Costa Rica or anywhere in South America, like in the Amazon. They buy cheap land and they go there and they make the new thing. Is the new eco-village. We're gonna, start over, is gonna be fantastic. But you never start over from scratch. That place where you build, the place that you bought, is never tabula rasa. No, nothing on it. It has a history, it has a culture, it has people in it. And I think a lot of the misfires that we've had with eco-village projects have been because of that. At the same time, we've learned a whole lot from this period. And the regenerative movement is hopefully learning the lesson and integrating the nested systems idea from systems thinking, as in your eco-village is part of a wider system. Your system is part of a wider system. And that system is part of a wider system. And so zooming out and understanding the role of that new community that you're building in the system, in the region where it is, and how you can potentiate and make both of them thrive. That's, I feel, the new age for eco-villages. Like, that's when it's going to start really clicking and really becoming a mainstream.
Yeah, because when you say eco-village, to me, there's it's like a village within a circle. But when you say regenerative community, somewhere you can pass through. It's not
nice.
It's not so closed off. So as an architect, then what is your role in designing these sort of regenerative communities?
Well, it depends on the project always. It can be coordinating. We've had a discussion 2 weeks ago about with other regenerative architects, or architects in the regenerative space. Let's call ourselves that way. About the role of architect as facilitator, because once you understand that a project is an infinitely complex set of moving parts, you have to relinquish the idea of control. And that's very hard for us left-brained societies. We need data. We need to know that we can control outcomes. We need, input versus output and stuff like that. And the more complex a project is, the better, because the more relationships and connections you have between the moving parts of this project, the better. But we always try to dumb a project down in order to be able to contain it. Like, this need for control that we have is working against us. And so I think my answer is, it depends on the project, because some projects need some things and some others need something else. And it's a matter of navigating all of these complexities without trying to be in control of anything. It's like, be like water type of thing.
Bruce Lee. So from an architect's point of view, how would you advise an architect to try and integrate and learn more about the permaculture systems?
Well, honestly, I was thinking about making a permaculture course for architects. So thank you for the plug. It's not there yet, but if we make a mailing list, then it could become a thing. Another element that I've been slowly setting up is regenerative patterns. It is at regenerativePatterns.com, and it's a start of a project that visualizes patterns of regeneration for the built environment in a graph way. So it's basically a graph of the connections between all of the elements of a project. Again, not trying to contain it, but trying to map the territory a bit. And that has the potential to become a map of the innovation space in the regenerative architecture world, becoming a first step for any architect that wants to start on this journey of becoming of recalibrating their role as architects and as placemakers.
And then on the flip side, then what advice would you give me as a permaculture designer to actually learn more about the architecture and how I can implement that more?
Well, so as a permaculture trained individual, I think you're much more likely to start with, much more inclined to understanding how and navigating all of this, because you are trained in systems thinking. You have an inherent understanding of systems thinking, whereas an architect from the trained in conventional architecture needs to shed this mechanistic view of the way we build. But what you can add to your permaculture practice when you think about buildings is thinking more about the inherent potential of built spaces for making that place better. Our buildings can make us better people if we design them right. They can help us towards the goals that we've set for ourselves if we design them right. They can interact with the land and make the land better if we design them right. And a lot of permaculture practice just goes, we need a shelter here. It's going to be, we're going to make it out of straw bale and it's going to be fine. But that's just scratching the surface of what a permaculture building could be. And so adding mindfulness and conscious deliberation about the potential of those built spaces can be a very good start. And understanding that they are always connected to their context. So, of course, starting with the vernacular inspiration, that is the way that traditionally it is being built in that specific context, is a very good place to start always. And so starting with humility and understanding why other people have been doing houses this way here is great. And then trying to add to that the layer of what we now know about land regeneration, about carbon footprints, about smart buildings, about all of the new, about biophilia, how humans are inherently in love with nature, and how we can bring that into our built environments. So all of these layers can be included in a permaculture project zone 0, and then it can be really nice.
Right. So say, for example, I decide, right, I'm all into this architect stuff. I really want to dive deep. I follow them steps. It may take me a few years. What can I do now? Can I hire you or your services then instead to sort of to get myself 2 or 3 years ahead in the
Yes, you
meantime,
can.
whilst learning? Right.
Yes, you can. And I can, depending on the size of the project, either coach you online or do trips to the site.
Advice for those looking to get in the architecture and perma architecture. Someone starting out, what would you advise them?
Well, there's a book that I wrote a couple of years ago that's called Listen to Your Land, and it's completely free online at my Substack, which is also free. So that's, I think, a good start. Listen to Your Land is a guide for a starter's guide for you to read the land that you want to build something on and find the best place for a house. And it helps you sort of fall in love with the place as you go along. There's also a checklist, it's illustrated, it's fun. And you can print it out and take the checklist with you on the site, which always comes in handy.
Yeah, that's great. We'll put the link in the description for that, so we could share. So what's your plans now for the future? Have you anything in the near future you're planning?
I'm building the Regenerative Patterns website right now, and looking to co-create it with all the all the actors in this ecosystem. So that's a much more sort of technical world of real estate professionals, from construction to interior design, all the way to investment and local governments. The aim of that is to completely recalibrate the industry for the regenerative age. So it's a bold move, no pressure. And along the way, I'm very happy to be involved in beautiful projects that are also bold and can, envision a beautiful future. One other project that is linked to that is the a storytelling tool to tell the complex stories of projects. So taking a complex project of regeneration and getting the process, the whole design process, and putting it in the forefront to explain what goes on behind the hood, to not only end users, but also potential investors, partners, local governments, and legislators and investors, etc. So I think that convincing as many people as possible that regenerative and permaculture inspired development is the way to go, and that we need frameworks and legislation and money to make them happen, is one of the important things that we need to do nowadays.
I touched on something there. Do you have much trouble with the local legislation of trying to do things that you're not allowed to do?
Long story short, yes.
And how are you overcoming them challenges?
Well, sometimes you don't, and sometimes you need to. You find the way to go around it. There's always, there's always a lose part somewhere when you implement. And we're all experimenting, and everything's, trotting along. Some places are easier to work with than others. Like Switzerland is a pain, for example, because it's so legislated that even just implementing stuff like circular economy and circularity in materials is almost impossible. So it depends on the place. Some places are cool with a lot of things. And also it depends a lot on the local authorities that you have to deal with, because it's a people's thing as well. So if you're lucky enough to have a mayor that is into what you're doing and willing to experiment, that is the biggest step forward you can take. And that's why all this stakeholder agreement and alignment that we were talking before is so important. Because we can do and think as many, innovative ways to make a beautiful place happen. If we don't have the legal infrastructure and the community engagement to actually implement them, let alone the money, but they just stop before they're even out of the blueprint, because they won't happen.
Yeah, it's something that frustrates me that you watch the news every night, climate change, fires, all this thing they throw at you, but then they don't have the mechanism in place at local government for you to actually implement solutions. And there's a big disconnect, and it's like, well, hold on a minute, I have a solution for you here, but you're not letting me do it. But you're telling me every night in the news that the world's ending, and it's like, right, you need to sort of join them two dots.
Hopefully it's starting to change fast. And there's always this coordination that needs to happen between the top down and the bottom up. And I feel like permaculture has been a lot of bottom up-ing for the past 10 years. And only lately I sort of feel like I'm growing up and getting to the top down pit of it as well, which is not fun, but I feel like it needs to be done. And the money part of it, the sustainable, is coming back to ecovillages. One of the main reasons why a lot of them don't work is because people don't think about money when they do them. They don't build them into a sustainable community. As you need to think smartly about money in a way. And if you don't have a healthy relationship with money, then it just becomes, one of those shaggy hippie places, which we love. I'm a hippie. But if we want to get this to mainstream, we need to be more smart about it.
I think that's a very good place to actually finish up, because that's basically what this podcast is about, is showing people different ways people in permaculture are earning their career or earning their money. Because to me, it's necessary to have people earning money in it to make it sustainable, because it has to grow. Joe, thank you very much. I think we've only scratched the surface there, but it's been really interesting. And thank you very much for coming on and chatting to us about permaculture.
Thank you, Cormac.
Guys, that was Joe Petroni, and I keep forgetting to do this. If you think you got value, go and like, subscribe, and give me a thumbs up. It helps. I'm supposed to say it at the start, but I always forget. And we'll chat these next week. Thanks, cheer. Oh, and I like to blow our course as well. Our PDC professional course is coming out in September, where we take you from being a PDC graduate, teach you digital design, how to digital design to professional standard, client communications, how to extract the information to get the best out of design, and a few other things too about marketing, business, websites. But that's been Permaculture Vine Podcast. I'll see you all next week. Cheers. Thanks, Joe.